weeks in the Boston Symphony once. And I spent 18 years playing as a freelancer in Broadway shows and ballets and pit orchestras and choral societies and everything else. And I decided that what always bothered me about this kind of work was that the conductors are constantly getting all of the attention. You always hear about the conductors. Their pictures are on the covers of the CDs. But you never see or hear about the people in the orchestra, like the third. There's no books about the fourth chair violist or the second trombone. And these people they're working hard. They're actually playing all those notes, unlike the conductors who are not. Being a part of this culture, even when you go to a concert, you never really see the culture. It is hidden from you. No one really shows you what, it's part of the job description. Spend most of their adolescence and adulthood and young adulthood in practice rooms. These people like being alone. They sit there and they play scales and arpeggios for hours and hours and hours. And I read somewhere in a recent article in a magazine that there are 14,000 graduates of music schools every year, and there are 100 jobs waiting for them. Which is, you know, what that tells you is, out of all these people who are so terribly antisocial, if you take the top 0.01% of that group, which are the ones who are practicing the most, they're the ones who win the auditions, and they are in show business. So in terms of their personality, it's a totally inappropriate place for these people, which is one of the reasons why conductors are so terribly important. But I've written a book about this world. It's called, let me get a copy of it here, Real Men Don't Rehearse. This is the name of the book, and well, there's a whole story about why I called it this book, but it's called Adventures in the Secret World of Professional Orchestras. And it's partly sort of what can I say, an anthropological study of the culture of professional musicians. But mostly it's my favorite stories of what it's like to be a professional musician. And when musicians get together, we don't talk about Mahler's intentions or, you know, Mozart's girlfriends. We talk about the night so-and-so got drunk and still had to play that trumpet solo. And can you believe it? He actually made it all the way through. So one of the stories, the first story I'm going to tell you about is there was one night, it was my second year playing in the Boston Pops with Arthur Fiedler. I was actually, I got to work with him his last 3 years of his life. And when the Boston Pops, you know, they play night after night after night, and they have to sell a lot of seats. So what they do is they sell to groups. There are group sales, and some nights, instead of being 16 or 17 groups of 50 or 100 people, there'll be one group that buys the entire hall. And one night, the American Guild of Organists was having its convention in Boston, and they bought every single seat in Symphony Hall, which meant that that night, every person in the audience was an organist/choir director. Well, you can't ignore that. You have to play something appropriate for them. So what they decided to do is have, there's an organist that, well, he was big stuff in the 50s. His name was E. Power Biggs. That was his actual name, and he was a very famous organist. At this time, he must have been like 89 years old. And they wheeled him out on stage for what turned out to be his last public appearance. And we played this little organ concerto, and it was all very nice, and everybody politely applauded. Now, in our parts, on the stands, we had the parts to the Hallelujah Chorus, but there was no chorus on the stage. And Fiedler turns around to this audience of organists/choir directors and says, "We have an encore for you. We're going to play the Hallelujah Chorus, and we want you to be the chorus." And then he turns around again and says, "Well, you all know it." And of course, they all laugh because they're all choir directors. They direct this, and they all have all the parts memorized. So try to get this picture in your mind. Here you have Symphony Hall, one of the greatest acoustic spaces in the world. You have Arthur Fiedler, arguably the most famous conductor in the world. The Boston Pops, certainly one of the most, if not the most famous orchestra in the world. One 21-year-old farm boy who had never seen this before. and a chorus of 2,000 professional singers that have been drinking for an hour and a half. So we start the Hallelujah chorus, and it's going along okay. And well, as is tradition, when you play a Hallelujah chorus, the audience stood up. But what's not tradition is they all started to sing. And they didn't just sing. They decided to really let us have it. And this 2,000 voices came in with this hallelujah. And it was like this tsunami of sound just came up from the audience. It was absolutely amazing. I played something like 3,000 concerts in my professional career. And, you know, 500 nutcrackers, they kind of run together in your mind. But that event I will never forget because there was no rehearsal for it and there was no audience to hear it. And yet it was one of the most amazing musical experiences of my life. It was just astonishing. That same year, that was 1976, and well, I don't know if many of you remember that was the bicentennial year, of course, and the Boston Pops was at the center of the universe that 4th of July. I didn't really know, well, up to that point, the 4th of July concerts out in the Esplanade had been failing. There was like 5,000 people came out with a picnic, you know, if it was nice weather kind of thing. Well, that year, somebody said, hey, let's have fireworks. And somebody said, you know, it is the bicentennial, and CBS said, hey, we should televise this. This is an important event. So they had like, I don't know, 18 MDC cops assigned and maybe 5, you know, those sawhorse things out there for crowd control. And as the day went on, a couple thousand people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people. Pretty soon there's like 250,000 people. That's before the show even began. That's how many people showed up. And they're calling, you know, police, get down here. We need crowd control and everything else. So when we got to the hall that night, we had to leave Symphony Hall an hour before. Instead of the usual buses that are just regular plain old buses, we had these, you know, if there's a riot, the police don't go there in a regular bus and they don't walk. They go in these buses that have the chicken wire on the windows and the armored everything. That's what they had for us. And we're like, what is this? Why are we getting on these buses with our instruments? I had my bass with me, and we're like going, what are we getting ourselves into? And all these sirens and police and motorcycles were cascading through the streets of Boston. Everybody's screaming and cheering for us. Well, we get down there. The entire side of Star Drive next to the Hat Shell was completely filled with people because no one had done any crowd control, and so they just spilled out on the street because there are 300,000 people there. There's no one else for them to go. So how are we supposed to get the buses anywhere near there? There's a traffic divider, it's about concrete this big, and a chain link fence. Well, they pulled the buses up on the wrong side of Star Drive. And we're all in formal wear, you know, we're out, and I have a string bass with me. We get off the bus, and they had taken wire cutters, and they cut a prison break hole in the fence. And I go up there, I'm dressed very nicely, and 2 big MDC cops pick me up. They shove me through the hole in the fence. 2 more on there grab me, put me down, and then my bass comes through the hole. Now we're in this, you know, crowd, and we could just see, just this very narrow, there's like a line of big policemen on this side and that side, all locked elbows like this, making this narrow little path for us to get to the Hat Show. So people are reaching around and screaming, and they're so happy to see us. So we finally snake our way into there. And now when you get to the Hat Shell, there's an entrance, and you can either go to the right where the lockers are, or you can make a left and go up a flight of steps up into the stage. Well, since I had my bass with me, I didn't want to go downstairs. I just wanted to say, well, I'll just unpack on the stage, right? So everyone else goes right, I go left. Story of my life. So I go up, the stairway is very dark, and you get up there, but then the light hits you. Well, what happened, I got to the top of the steps, and I look out, and this was the first time I see, on every blade of grass, every square inch of water, and every tree branch, there is a human being that's been there since like dawn in the hot sun, waiting for something to happen, and now I have appeared in a white tuxedo. And I hear this murmur. And I'm not even conscious. I just walk up and I go, like, what is this murmur? I look out and see this crowd just as far as the eye can see. And now I notice they're all pointing at me. And they're all looking at me. And I go like, well, I didn't want to be impolite. You know, I waved. And this ovation comes out of this crowd. Like they're standing, cheering. I mean, just screaming, yelling, all for me. It took a lot of practicing to get there. At that moment, it was worth it. That was a wonderful day in playing that show. playing in a symphony orchestra, there's a membrane kind of that you pass through from being a student or an ardent, pretty good, pseudo-professional to making it in that world. And there really isn't much of a transition. You're either here or there. And the first time I played in a major symphony orchestra, which was the Pops, well, I'd gone home for the summer. I was 20 years old. Phone rang. My mother was so excited to hear the Boston Symphony calling our house and wanted me to play a week of Pops. So I said, I'm going to say no. It's either that or fry hamburgers. I guess I'll take the job. So I flew back to Boston, even though the amount of money I was making was going to pay less than the trip there and back. And I showed up. Okay, here I am. I'm in the Boston Pops. Well, we normally think of orchestras rehearsing a lot, but when you get to that level, what you have to understand is that they don't really rehearse all that much. It's everybody knows everything. If you are good enough to play in an orchestra like that, you must pretty much know all the repertoire. You know everything, and everybody knows everything. And when you're the first person there, they're not going to slow down for you. And there's no indoctrination day. There's nothing like, well, come in, the new guy, we're going to, show you the ropes. No. You just parachute in, and you're there, and boy, pay attention, because this is your one shot. If you blow it, they're going to get somebody else in a hurry. So the first week, they used to do an entire week out there on the Hat Show, and that we had 4.5 hours of rehearsal that day, in which we rehearsed for the entire week. And that included Beethoven's Fifth, Beethoven's Sixth, Beethoven's Seventh, which I had never played, Mendelssohn Italian Symphony, Tchaikovsky Fourth, which I had played once in high school music camp, Sibelius Second, which I'd never heard, Peter and the Wolf, and all the pop stuff. And this was in 4.5 hours we covered. And we didn't play it, obviously. That's 9.5 hours of music if you just play it straight through. They would start at the beginning of pieces. So, okay, we play the first 16 bars. Here's a treble spot. Let's look at that. Let's skip to the end. Okay, mark in. We're not taking the repeat. Second movement. That's the pace of this day. And I'm sitting there going, I've never played this before. I don't know this. I don't know that. But you don't want to say anything. You have to pretend like you do. Okay, I got through that day. And no one noticed that I was really treading water big time. And we got, okay, here's my big day. We're out in the Esplanade. It's my first Boston Pops concert. I'm in my brand new tuxedo that I bought the preceding week, and I'm warmed up, and we're going to play Beethoven's Fifth. That's on the stand in front of me, right? So the conductor comes out, takes a bow. The crowd screams and yells. Everyone stands up for the conductor. The audience, the applause starts to die down. Excuse me. I sit down, and I realize no one else in the orchestra sat down except me. I'm right back up again. Why is everyone standing? Well, the conductor, Harry L. Dixon, pointed at Fred Buda, the percussionist, and said, and starts playing a roll. The whole orchestra starts playing the national anthem. No one told me this was going to happen. There's no music for it on my stand because everybody knows it. Why would you need the music? Don't you know it already? Well, I learned, the proper resolution of Neapolitan sixth chords at conservatory and the influence of the Flemish school, but never once did anyone said, you got to learn the bass part to the national anthem. Did you ever have one of those dreams where you're trying to dial a phone and you just can't do it? That's what this felt like. I was just going, I didn't know what key it was in. I had nothing. So all I did was you can slide a bow without making any sound, and that's what I did because I had no idea what it was. I went home that night so humbled with my tail between my legs, and I memorized the bass part to the national anthem. And I can play it for you right now if you want to hear it. That was just my first day at Pops. I should have known. But anyway, besides playing at Pops, I also did a lot of work in the theater district. And one of the occupational hazards of being a professional musician is playing in orchestra pits. It's a very bizarre world. It's a study in sensory deprivation because you're down in this hole in the ground. They don't even bother in our euphemism-soaked society. There's no effort to say, well, it's actually an audience sightline enhancement area. There's nothing like that. They call it the pit. You're in the pit. You're working in the pit, and it is a pit. You're down in the basement. And depending on where you are in the pit, sometimes you can see the ceiling of the theater, but that's all you can see. You can't really, there's barren walls that are either plaster or unpainted or concrete, and They don't clean pits because you're crammed in there so carefully and so tightly that to clean it, you'd have to take everything out, and no one wants to do that. So for however long the run of the show or the ballet or the opera is, you deal with the dust that gradually collects in that, the lowest point of the theater. The other thing about it is you're down there, and you can hear the show, and if it's the worst of this is the ballets because there's no dialogue. You hear the pitter-patter of anorexic little feet up there. And the audience claps and applauds in the same place every night. And you're sitting there, oh, they're going to clap now. Clap, clap, clap. Oh, they're going to laugh now. Laugh, you just sit there. It's this weird, you feel it's alternate universe. And you always tell yourself, I'm going to hire a substitute. I'm going to buy a ticket. I'm going to come see this show and see what those people are laughing at. You never do. You never do. I played, over the years, over 500 Nutcrackers. That's, anyway. There's one particular pit story I like to tell, which, well, something about the culture of musicians, I want to get away from the stories and talk about the culture, is that you are devoted to playing the notes on the page. I mean, the composer per se, him personally, you don't care if he's alive or dead, but the notes that God bestowed upon his brain and are now on the page, those black dots, is your purpose for living. And it doesn't matter how much you have to stretch your fingers or hold this up for 2-3 hours at a time, or how bad your back hurts and how many chiropractors you have to see. The notes are the most important thing, and you must do that. And there was one instrumentalist who really exemplified this in such an extraordinary way. I love to tell this story. We were, you may not remember this, maybe you do, there was a Broadway show called My One and Only. It played on Broadway back in the late 80s, I think. It starred Tommy Tune and Twiggy. And it ran on Broadway for about 2 years, but it previewed here in Boston for 5 weeks, and I was the bass player for that run of that show for that 5 weeks. And it was a great show. It was all Gershwin music, and it was really fun to play it. And anyway, part of the show, at one point in the show, there's a scene where they actually, it was a beach scene, and they actually installed a water tank in the stage, right dead center down near the audience. And they put like 100 gallons of water, and for that scene, someone would run out, pull up the planks, and there'd be a, this little swimming pool kind of thing there, and they would kick water around and sing "It's Wonderful" or something like that. So, and every night it was some union stagehand's job to pull a plug and drain this tank out and then fill it up the next day. Otherwise, you'd get, it would be stagnant and stinky water, if you didn't do that. So they always had to do that every night. So one night, it was like we're 3 weeks into the run, and I'm back in the back of the hall, and the conductor's kind of like here, and the percussionist. Now there's this percussionist guy. He's dead center in the pit, and he has a huge drum set down there, and even he has all these other instruments he has to play occasionally. Like he had 3 or 4 timpani, he had a big bass drum, he had xylophones, he had marimbas, he had glockenspiels, steam whistles, sound effects, you name it. This guy had just about a whole hardware store to himself in the center of this pit. So we're playing the show, and we'll just have it's very dark down there. You can just have stand lights, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye that he's doing something strange. And I'm playing along, and I can't really take my eye off the page too much, but I finally look up, and I see, in the dim glow of the stand lights, a little drop of water. Doink, right on his head. And he's doing this, he's like, we're in the pit of the Colonial Theater in downtown Boston, and he's getting water on his head. He's playing, he can't stop, he's going along. Well, you kind of like, okay, condensation, whatever. We're playing along, and I see another, doink, right on his head. And and now I see it, and a couple of other people seen it too, or noticing this guy. Well, it turns out, whoever's job it was to empty the tank and fill it up again had forgotten to put that little drain plug back in the tank that particular evening for whatever reason, or maybe it fell off, who knows. And it took the whole first act for this water to drain out and find its way through the lath and everything else down to the lowest point of the theater, which is the pit. And it collected pretty much in the roof of the pit right on top of this guy. So he's playing in a tuxedo And Tommy Tune is up there singing, Twiggy is up there dancing and singing, and now it starts to be kind of a light drizzle. It's just on this guy. You know, like Charlie Brown and that cloud that follows him around. Everybody else dry as a bone. This guy is like in a light drizzle. Now, it intensifies. Now it's actually raining on this guy, and he's stuck. I mean, he's in the middle of all this stuff. He can't really move. It's coming on not only him, but all of his instruments, too. At some point, it gets worse and worse, and to the point where it's an actual monsoon on this guy. It is coming down like a hard, hard, hard rainstorm. And he's playing the whole time. He can't, miss a note because you can't stop. You can't stop playing. And we're all torn between terrible pity and hysterical laughter watching this guy. He took one of his xylophone case and he rigged it up as a poncho. He looked like one of those ladies on the Russian steppes, holding this thing over his head as this rain is coming down. He had these set drums. He had to take his snare drum. It has to look like a little ridge around the top of it. He had to tip it out to get the water out so he could play it. And when he hit a suspended cymbal in the light of the stand light, these beautiful rainbow droplets would come out. He didn't miss a note. The show must go on, and I always like to talk about him because he just was such a hero to me in that realm. Let's see. Another occupational hazard of the music business is what we refer to as playing kiddie concerts, and that's with 2 Ks. Children and orchestras aren't the best combination because sitting quietly for an hour in most households is considered punishment. And so when you bring kids into a concert hall, it's kind of, tough. And what usually happens in symphony orchestras is there just isn't any money. There's no budget for it. So what typically happens is you have all these yellow buses pull up outside from every school within 50-mile radius, and they bring all these kids in there. They're screaming and yelling, and they're so excited. And we're going to try and play a show and drum some culture into these little munchkins. And, you try to do something for them, but I played some children's concerts that were astonishing. I was once playing, they brought in at the Wang Center 5,000 high school kids to watch Sleeping Beauty for 3 hours one afternoon. So they're all out of school, and they're very excited to be there. So we play the first act, and it goes okay. It's ballet. Well, during the intermission, someone decided to open the concession stand, make a few bucks. The kids come back for the second act. They all have bags of M&Ms. And there are box seats that are very close to the stage off to the side. And, of course, they put kids in there, too. They packed them in everywhere. Well, if you calculate, and, there's some calculus kids who take it in third period, the trajectory, and, of course, the mass times velocity, 32 feet per second. If you throw an M&M just the right way, it will hit the head of a timpani and make a very satisfying boing noise. And somebody figured out that they got a dead hit on the timpani. And once they got the range, these things started to come down, just like the boing. Well, they didn't just stop there. They hit the timpani, and depending on the shape of the M&M, it would go somewhere, very often up onto the stage. Now you've got all these little green ball bearings with the dancers, dancing around and having to skate around all these things. That was one children's concert that, we got out of that barely, no one injured. There's another time I was doing a children's concert. It was in one of those big war memorial auditoriums with the, like usually used for wrestling matches. And they bust in all these 7th graders who were very excited to be out of school. And the conductor, for the theme of this concert, decided to do something called Minuets Through the Ages. Real toe tappers, something these kids could really relate to. And we're playing these minuets, which I hate. Oh, sorry. And so the kids took their programs and just all of this pent-up rage for having been forced to listen to this boring music, and they're showering us with spitballs. It's just because they're up above us. We're completely surrounded with this thing. And I consider myself lucky to have gotten out of there alive. Can I ask someone what time it is, because my clock is not working? 8:25, thank you very much. I was playing one children's concert. It was particularly amazing to me. It was about a composer. I think it was about Haydn. And the premise of the show was that Haydn, his ghost visited this young lady for the purpose of telling her how awful his life was. And so we had all these flashbacks of dancers with kids, and at one point, and I'll never forget this, 6 little kids came out with a stretcher, and there was like a mound on the stretcher, and we were informed by Haydn's ghost that this was Mozart's corpse. There's 5-year-olds out in the audience. And I'm playing this show, and I'm incredulous. Mozart's corpse for 5-year-olds? Is this really appropriate? So I went up to the people who were running the event afterwards. Not that I, usually talk much. I said, I really think that was over the line. Mozart's corpse for 5-year-olds? Come on. I mean, anybody could do better. I could write something better than that. And they said, well, you're so smart. Let's see you do it. Big mouth. And I said, uh-oh. Well, I went home and I thought it over, and I was like, okay, what could I do? Maybe something like I had this idea of maybe doing like a trial with, 3 little pigs or something like that. And then I just blurted out the phrase, Peter versus the wolf. And I said, what an idea. You could have like a trial with the wolf denying that he ate the duck. Wouldn't that be fun? So I went to a lawyer, and fortunately it was my landlord, so it was free. And I told him the story of Peter and the wolf from front to back, and he listened to it in a very lawyerly fashion. He said, well, it's obvious that the wolf was denied due process. And then he started telling me that Peter versus the wolf is actually, that implies a civil case. It should really be the state versus the wolf. And I said, I can't sell that. Well, we'll get around that. And he started talking about, the wolf converted the duck to his own use, and actually Peter is a minor, so the grandfather is really responsible for everything that happened. He's quoting these legal precedents of animals eating other animals, and you can't sue somebody for an animal doing what comes naturally to it. And I said, thank you. I think I have enough information. So I played around with it. I said, okay, we'll have all the instruments come. And what happens is each instrument is called to the stand and cross-examined by the wolf, saying, well, it's how many hours a day do you practice, and all these questions. And we put on the show, and it was like, okay. Well, somebody talked to somebody about it. My phone rings. It's this Phoenix Symphony Orchestra, and they want to rent it. Well, I don't have anything. It's just the script. Well, whatever. Just send us what you got. They gave me $600. I'm like, wow, this is pretty good. And then the phone rings again. It's someone in the Syracuse Symphony. We heard about this show, Peter versus the Wolf. Can we rent this from you? I said, well, yeah, I guess. And at this point, I said, gee, maybe I should make up a set of parts. And so bit by bit, I started, it was all word of mouth. One musician in one town would call another musician in another town and say, let's do this for our children's concert. Well, one day I get an email from Monica Lopez of Rio de Janeiro. And we want to do Pedro versus O Lobo in Rio de Janeiro. I'm like, well, wow, that would be nice. I'm wondering if I could get a free plane ticket out of this or something, and because everyone who does it, most often in America, they just throw it together on a Saturday afternoon. They have rehearse in the morning and put a show in the afternoon. It's not a big budget. And I said, okay. And I said, do you think, we could arrange, for me to come down and see it? Well, we'll talk to you about that. So they finally arranged. I get the money wired to me like the 2 days before the flight. And I find myself on a plane to Rio de Janeiro. Now, what they kept telling me was that we're going to do this in the Teatro Municipal, which is the municipal theater of Rio de Janeiro. Okay, it's the town theater. Isn't that nice? So I'm not thinking, okay, well, let's go down there, and hopefully it won't be a real flea bag hotel or anything. And maybe they won't rob me at the airport. It's not like those Nigerians who get you down there and then no one's ever seen me again. I mean, I was really thinking maybe this is what's going to happen. So I get down there. Well, I'm met at the airport by a guy. He takes me. Well, it turns out the Municipal Theater of Rio de Janeiro is not really the Municipal Theater. It is the Carnegie Hall of South America. Anytime you see a movie about Rio, they show this theater because it's a copy of the Paris Opera House. It's a major landmark of Rio. It's in, flying down to Rio, they show it in that. Beautiful, beautiful building, and this is a huge, big deal. It's like the Kennedy Center, but in Portuguese. I had no clue that this was coming, and they put me up in a 5-star hotel with a view of the water, and I'm going, oh my goodness, this is just amazing. And then that same year I got called up, someone in Germany wanted to do it, so they flew me over to Europe to see the show. It's just amazing, and I have to say, it's a tremendously satisfying, rewarding thing to go around the world and see your stuff being done by people like this. And I owe it all to Mozart's corpse. Going back to some Pops concert, one year, this is back in the 80s, we packed up the Boston Pops Esplanade Orchestra. I should mention very briefly that there are two Boston Pops orchestras. There's the Boston Symphony Players, and that's the official Boston Pops now, and then there's the one that's made up of freelancers like myself, and that is the Boston Pops Esplanade Orchestra. And I use the word Boston Pops rather freely here, but I was mostly in the Esplanade Orchestra. I just want to make that little footnote here so no one thinks I'm trying to be something I'm not. But anyway, the Esplanade Orchestra one year decided they decided to take us with John Williams over to Japan for a couple of weeks. What fun. Playing an orchestra tour is one of the most amazing logistical adventures you ever want to see. If you go down to the basement of Symphony Hall, which no one is ever allowed down there, the hallways are lined with instrument trunks, bass trunks, harp trunks, cello trunks. I mean, you can't really get around down there because there are trunks just stacked every place. They can't put them away. First of all, there's no place to put them, and they constantly use them, so you'd have to be bringing them, in, out, back and forth. And they packed all of us up, and they took us to Japan, and it was just, 2 weeks, all expenses paid, staying in wonderful hotels. And some of the adventures we had there, when you go to Japan, they have these walkways over the busy intersections, which, instead of, crossing traffic, whatever, you just walk over them. Well, there are some very enterprising people in Japan who use these walkways to put out advertisements. In this case, what you find on these railings are advertisements for, shall we say, feminine companionship. And they have these beautiful little full-color pieces of paper with a picture of a young lady with enough of a phone number to satisfy modesty, and strategically placed. And these are perfectly stuck on the railings with double-sided tape. Well, being Americans, we start collecting these things, like baseball cards, and because some were more prevalent than others, they were kind of neat. And I'll get back to this story in a minute. Anyway, we were playing a concert one night, and when Japanese audiences come in, even for a Pops concert, they sit there like it's a funeral. I mean, they just do not make a sound at all, and they stare at you while you warm up. They don't talk to each other or anything. And one of the things that we do at Pops, it's tradition, there's a piece by Leroy Anderson called The Typewriter. And, if those of you know it, if you don't, well, they actually, in Symphony Hall, we don't simulate it. They have an actual Underwood typewriter with a big piece of sheet metal stuck into the platen, so they play this typewriter part while you hear the typewriter. But that's not enough. They also have a shtick where the percussionist doing it comes out like he's a great soloist. And he has the little visor and a big cigar. He pretends like he's the guy at the newsroom doing this thing. So we're at this Japanese audience sitting there staring at us with no laughter, not getting any of it, and this poor percussionist is going through this whole thing of, getting out this big plastic cigar and sticking it in his mouth, and John Williams is putting up with all this. Okay, we're ready to play the typewriter. The percussionist opens his part to the typewriter, and here, stuck in the middle, is one of those little hooker handouts. The whole orchestra sees this. Of course, the audience does it. We burst into laughter, and the audience is sitting there dead quiet going, oh. All these Japanese people, they think are absolutely nuts. And the percussionist is trying to get this thing unstuck from his part. And but anyway, on that same tour, we're going along. I noticed there's another tradition at Pops, which is the spinning of the basses. We often spin string basses depending on the encores of the piece. It's right before what's called the recapitulation of the main theme of one of those Pops numbers. And John Williams was never terribly comfortable with all of this bass spinning. Despite the extraordinary emotional power of this man's music, in real life, he is one of the shyest human beings you'd ever want to meet. He's just very quiet, and he was never terribly comfortable with us doing it, but it was such a tradition, we just ignored him and did it anyway. Well, when we get to Japan, we open up the books for the folders. Well, you can't just spin any old time. You got to spin in specific places in specific pieces, and none of those pieces that we spin in were in any of the programs for the tour. It was a subtle but very specific hint. Well, none of that here, you know. And I'm looking, well, okay, I get you. And the library is 10,000 miles away, so, you know, no spins on the tour. Well, it's going along like the third night of the tour, and then the head of the press department of the Boston Pops comes up to me. I'm just the fifth chair bass player, but everyone knows I'm the troublemaker / choreographer with all the bass spins. He says, Justin, the basses aren't spinning. Well, yeah, and your point is? Well, the promoters are very upset. Apparently these Japanese guys thought, oh, it'd be so great to see, because they never spin basses in Japan, you know, so watch these crazy Americans spin these basses. And of course we're not spinning, and you know, promoters are upset because we're not doing it. And I said, well, I started to explain to her that there's no music for us to spin to, but she just stopped me. She says, you must spin the basses. You have to spin the basses. The promoters are upset. And she kept saying that. She's walking away from me. The promoter's upset. You have to spin the basses. That's how our conversation ended. So there's nothing in my contract says I'm responsible for all of this, but I said, okay. So I sat down and think, I got to find a spot to spin the basses in, even though the conductor doesn't want me to. And lo and behold, there was a spot in 76 trombones. We had never spun the basses there. It was a perfect spin spot, and no one had ever noticed this before. So I got these bass players together, new spin spot. I wrote it in everyone's part. Start on beat 2, stop on beat 1. Everybody, you know. So we get there, and of course John Williams knows nothing of this. And we get to that point, and I had enlisted the percussion section to do some sound effects for me. And we get to that part, and we spin the basses. Oh, it's a beautiful start, unison stop. The percussionist did a big mouth whistle. That crowd goes absolutely nuts. And John Williams is looking at me. Like, you got me, you son of a... And I'm just smiling back at him, and that was one of my favorite Japan tour stories. I have to ask someone, what time is it now? About 8:40. 8. Okay. A lot of what happens in Pops concerts is we play 1812 a lot. And of course in 1812 the score actually calls for cannons to be played. Usually it's done by a bass drum, but of course they actually will wheel out 105 millimeter howitzers from the local, you know, Army Reserve base and fire these things off. And they actually will have people. Arthur Fiedler's son used to stand out there with a baton and a score, and he would conduct these guys in the camouflage outfits playing the cannons. That just must have been very satisfying work. And one night, you know, we were used to this. You know, you see them come up, the big trucks, the deuce-and-a-half trucks come, and they got the cannons, and they set them up. And we're down in some estate down in Long Island somewhere. And we were playing 1812, and well, first we had a rehearsal in the morning. And then we had all afternoon to just, you know, be bored and wander around this estate trying to find something to do while these guys are setting up their cannons like everyone else. They got to practice. Every once in a while I hear this boom, they fire off a cannon just to practice. So I'm in a white tuxedo, which gives me carte blanche to do anything. And I walked up to these guys. I said, hey, you know, can I see the cannon? They said, oh yeah, they gave me a whole tour of the gun. It was really neat. And I finally said, hey, can I fire off a round? They said, no, you can't do that, but you can pull a lanyard on empty chamber. So they went through the whole rigmarole of sighting the gun and, you know, all the commands, and then it's okay, we're going to fire the gun. And I pulled this chain, and of course nothing happened, but it went clunk on the firing chamber. But I finally asked these guys, I said, how come you don't go deaf firing these guns? And they said, well, it's not that loud on this side of the gun. And I noticed that the cannons were pointed at the stage. I said, but I'm going to be out there. And they said, yeah, it's going to be very loud tonight. Well, why don't you point them away? Well, this is how they told us to do it, and, you know, we are only following orders. So that night, I stuffed all this Kleenexes in my ears that night, because I knew what was coming, although most of the people in the orchestra didn't. So we're playing 1812, and we're going along, and finally the moment comes for the cannons to go off, and these cannons go, and, you know, when something's that loud, it doesn't really qualify as a sound anymore. It's actually a shock wave, because your ears can't cope with it. My bass went up in the air like this. The entire, it's like someone punching you in all directions. It's just boom, like this force of the air is just hitting you. The entire second violin section surrendered. And as the cannons went off, more and more people, you know, their fear of getting fired was gradually worn down by their fear of losing their hearing. And everyone is just bent over like this. We limped to the end with like 2 trumpets and 1 trombone and 1 triangle. It was the most pathetic ending of 1812 you ever want to hear. But, you know, at least that many people played to the end. So I want to fast forward a little bit. And one of the jobs I do, now that I've left the orchestra, is I am a score reader. And we do, when a television show occurs, it was my job to sit next to the director in the booth. And my finger, I'm the bouncing ball, my finger goes along in the score, and you have to plan shots on TV. You can't just hope that you'll get it, because what you will get is an oboe player blowing liquid out of a hole somewhere, or awful things that musicians do when they're not playing. You don't want to show that on national television. So it's very important that they be actually playing when you take to a musician, otherwise you don't know what you're going to do. There was one night, I'll never forget this, there was a percussionist, and we're on the guy, he's about to play these big, down the Esplanade, and he had the crash cymbals, and we're on him because as we're building and building to his thing, and he's like there, and as, you know, 1 million people are tuned in the 4th of July, and this guy goes, we got nowhere to go. I mean, we're on this guy, and then he plays, and we're all just, oh. Classic night in the Esplanade with stuff like that. So anyway, I'm in the truck one day, we're doing the 4th of July, and they got the cannons set up out there. And they're pointed at the river. And some enterprising young camerawoman had gone out on one of those floating docks and gotten this shot, beautiful, beautiful shot of these 4 cannons facing the river. And I'm in the truck, which is about 50 yards away, big, you know, semi-tractor trailer filled with, you know, all this equipment. And I noticed this shot, and I say, is somebody across the river getting that shot? And they said, no, she's like right there. And I said, well, those cannons are really loud. And the director says, well, Susie, we are told the cannons are really loud. Gotcha. I leaned over, I said, you know, those cannons are really loud. Gotcha. And at this point, I'm like, well, no one's hearing me, and I don't know what else to do about this, because I said, those cannons are really loud. And someone says, oh, we heard you the first time, Justin. And I'm like, okay, I'm you know, pushing my, you know, level of authority in this space. So there was just, you know, nothing else. So around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, someone said, hey, let's get a shot of those cannons for the 6 o'clock news. And I'm sitting there just watching. I feel like I'm watching the Titanic pull away from the harbor, you know, and there's nothing I can do. And so they get these National Guardsmen out there. They're loading these charges into the cannons, you know, and we're rolling. The truck is brought to life. There's a guy who rolls tape over here, and the camera people are set, and the floor directors are set, and we're going, okay, we're going to get this shot of the cannons. Susie's all set. The shot is framed beautifully. I'm sitting there going, those cannons are really loud. And the order to fire is given, and 4 howitzer cannons go off. Well, one guy was early, but the other 3 were right at the same time. So it was like, pa-boom, like this. The truck I'm in is doing this. Susie's shot is obliterated with smoke, you know, from the cannons. And we hear the distant echoes of the guns from Fitchburg and Wayland coming back, you know, by whoa, 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 like that, you know. And finally, they all die down. The smoke gradually, haze clears away, the smoke. And everyone in the truck is going, oh, beautiful shot, beautiful shot. And the director says, puts on his squawk, says, Susie, beautiful shot. So he sits the thing, Susie, beautiful shot. Now at this point, all the euphoria in the truck is suddenly and gradually transformed from the euphoria to, is she dead? Justin said they were really loud, and we're not hearing anything, and guns went off. Finally, I have to warn the audio people, we hear over the speaker this quiet, pinched little voice, you know, everyone worried. We hear just above a whisper, we hear Susie, and she just says, holy shit. That is a true story. What time have I got here? What time is it? 15 minutes left? It's 1:15. I'm going to, let's see. I I'm going to try and answer some questions here. I asked everybody here to fill out some questions. I have not seen these. I'm very brave. I'm going to try these. I'm going to shuffle them up. And here, okay. Have you ever gone on stage tipsy? There was a night on the Esplanade. It was, again, I didn't really start it, but I perfected it, was the bass section parties. We had 9-minute intermissions. And every night, it was a different bass player's job to bring 7 beers and food for our little intermission snack, because there was nothing else to do down there with the heat and the bugs. So one night, it was my night to bring beer, and I found this stuff called Molson Brador in a liquor store. I'd never seen it before, and everyone was very competitive, you know, bringing stuff. And it was dark stuff. Well, anyway, you have 9 minutes before the tuning ace, so we all rushed back, and I had, I don't know, some snacks, and I put pressure on these new young conservatory graduates who were in the orchestra that year to chug down their beer like a man. And so we all drink these beers. Tuning ace starts, so we all come rushing back out to play the second half of the concert. Well, it turns out Molson Brador is not beer, it is malt liquor. And we had each consumed the equivalent of 3 beers in 9 minutes. My music stand is doing this. Come on, come back. And the worst of it, though, is we were playing the Hummel Trumpet Concerto, and the second movement is in C flat, which means every F is an F flat, which is E, and every C flat is a B, because there's no such thing. Well, it's, you know, there's no black key between the white keys there. And it's very complicated music to explain, and trying to figure this out when you just had the equivalent of 3 beers is very, very difficult. And the trouble was, every time someone played a C natural instead of a C flat, we just started to giggle. And we were dead center in the stage that year, and Harry Ellis Dixon started yelling at us in the concert, basses, stop fooling around, and we thought that was so funny. The basses were loaded. Next question here is, what was your most memorable concert? Well, it was probably that, well, I'll probably finish up with one. I'm going to tell that later. Let's see. You've played hundreds of composers, thousands of pieces. What's your most favorite and why? Well, I don't think I have a particularly favorite piece, because, you know, anything by Tchaikovsky or Brahms, you know, there's certain arrangers that it pops that would do things. Leroy Anderson was one of my favorite composers. You don't want to have, you know, there are many pieces that I enjoy, but it would be hard to pick one. It really would, because it depends, you know, there are just so many. That's my answer to whether. Would you do it again? That is, play with the Pops. I'd not. Well, no. It was a great experience, and it was the person that I was. It was a great place for me to be. I mean, being in an orchestra is a wonderful sense of belonging, and I needed a sense of connection to other people at that time, because I felt very disconnected, I think, as a young man. And when you play in an orchestra, it's a wonderful feeling of connection to 90 other people, and you have a place, and you have a purpose and a function, and it's like a big family that's moving together all at once in rhythm. And that's, you know, I still miss that. When I was in my 20s, I had a terrible need for that, and I was willing to practice and kill myself 8 hours a day and get tendinitis and back pain and everything else to get that. And what it costs to do personally, to do this kind of work professionally, it's very, very hard. You have to really want to do it, and at this point, I think I don't have the fire in me anymore to suffer as much as you have to suffer to get a job like that. What was the biggest sacrifice you made to be in the Pops, and was it worth it? Gee whiz, I'm gonna. I think I just answered that. Let's see. Who's your favorite or least favorite conductor? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. There's so few and so many. What time is it before I get going here? 10 minutes. All right. I think one of my favorite conductors, and I'm going to talk about him in a minute, was Henry Mancini. He was, you know, just a great musician and a wonderful guy, and I'm going to, you know, save talking about him for a minute. And John Williams is also, I loved playing for him. He was, when he's conducting his own music, he is one of the best conductors you ever want to play for. Very, very professional. I never played for Keith Lockhart, so I'm not going to make any comments about him anyway. Arthur Fiedler, I really enjoyed playing for Arthur. And I'm trying to think. Well, I actually got to play for Leonard Bernstein once. I was 16 years old. It was the first summer they had the Tanglewood Festival Chorus, and I thought it would be a good way to meet girls. It was by joining this chorus rehearsal. They didn't specify Leonard Bernstein, and I ended up in this chorus with doing Missa Solemnis with Leonard Bernstein. And he actually heard me make a mistake in a chorus of 400. He said, somebody was early over here. And very, very much impressed me. So anyway, you have to be careful talking about conductors, because conductors are kind of, they're somewhere between the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus in people's minds. People love their conductors, and I avoid criticizing them. Musicians are very cynical about conductors in general because they don't make a sound, and we feel that we're doing all the work. So I don't want to prejudice anyone's musical skill that way. Let's see. That one I've already answered. Let's see. What made you choose to play the string bass? No one, to my knowledge, has ever chosen to play a string bass. What typically happens is you're the last kid to show up the day they assign instruments for band, and you're tall for your age. And the trouble is, it's kind of a gateway drug, because if you do in fact play the bass, you're the only one in 3 counties, so everyone calls you. I never got turned down for anything once it was known that I actually had a string bass and knew the names of the strings. That was good enough. Call that kid Justin, he's got a bass and his mother will actually bring him. No one ever says, is he any good? They don't ask that question. Has he got a bass? That's good enough. Okay. I'm down to my, let's see, in the last 5 minutes here, I'm going to share one last story with you about my favorite conductor, Henry Mancini, who I'm sure you all know. You wrote Moon River and Charade and all those other stories. And after Arthur Fiedler died, there was, well, you know, how are we going to replace him? And one of the things they did was, well, let's have a tour and have Henry Mancini come in and at least do a summer tour with him. So we did a 2-week tour with Henry Mancini all over the country, playing all of his music. And this man was not only one of the nicest people I've ever met, he was one of the sexiest men I've ever met, most charming men I ever met. And certainly musically, it was just a joy and a thrill to work with him. And he wasn't even a conductor in the usual sense. He just said, you know, it kind of goes like this, you all know it, and we would just play it because we loved him so much. We were just playing at the absolute edge of our, you know, technical ability all the time, just wanting to please this man and do something nice for him. So we did this tour, and the tour, it was all Mancini music, which is heavenly. You know, we're just playing all these wonderful pieces like Moon River every night. And well, one night, we're towards the end of the tour, and we were in a hockey rink with about 20,000 people in it. And I was back on one side, and I had this group of people behind me, about 1,000 people. And I decided, well, the last piece on the show was The Stripper by David Rose, that famous burlesque number piece. And if we had time, we would play The Stripper as an encore. And there was a bass spin in it. So I wanted the crowd behind me to notice the bass spin, so I'm signaling to them. I'm right blocking their view of everything else, so I'm signaling, look at me, look at me. And they're all like, whoa, what's this bass player doing? So we get to the spin spot, we spin the basses, and this crowd behind me erupts into a thunderous applause. Everyone else in the hall is kind of like taken surprised by this. They weren't expecting it. And Mancini is also taken by surprise because he wasn't expecting this big thunderous applause just from one little section. And he looks at me like, what are you doing over there? And I mean, he wasn't mad at me. He was like pretending to be mad at me. And I was pretending I had no idea what was going on because he knew I was a little bit of a troublemaker. So we had enough time, but the only music we had left was The Stripper, so we decided to play it again. So Mancini comes out, and he sort of, as he walks past the other bass player, he says, where's he working tomorrow night? And we start to play. Now Mancini knows something's going to happen at the spin spot, so he's watching me, but I'm like doing everything down here under my bass, so he can't see anything. So this crowd is now pumped like you wouldn't believe to do something, and so instead of spinning at the spin spot, we all lifted our basses up over our heads and shook them, which in the crowd behind me just, oh, it's huge, huge applause. I let them clap for about 2 bars, and then I cut them off. And they all stopped, silent, which is, and he's like, what are you doing? I mean, he's like, what are you doing over there? He's pretending like something goes on. Now the whole audience knows something's going on between me and Henry Mancini. And I just pretend I don't know what's going on. And so the concert ends, it's just a magnificent event. And everyone's just screaming and cheering in the audience. But Mancini does not turn around and take a bow. He doesn't acknowledge the audience. He just steps off the podium. He walks right down the lip of the stage. He comes up to me, he takes my hand, and gives me a personal bow to 20,000 people. This was the high point of my bass playing career. And that pretty much, we have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to try and do one, let's see, my most embarrassing moment and most frustrating. I'll skip that question. All right, I will tell one. This was an embarrassing, this actually happened. We were at the Wolf Trap Farm Park down there, short story. It's a beautiful facility, you know, really just magnificent, you know, and they have a shell that comes down for us. And there's a false, you know, there's a wall that flies up into space, and they'd put our bass trunks back there, and bass players, we just change our clothes there. And so we played the concert, we go back, and we're very eager to get onto the bus. So we're all just ripping our tuxes off, putting the basses in, and we're standing, we're in hallways, whatever, we get stripped down to our underwear, you know, we're trying to change. Well, we look up, and this wall was no longer there. It had flown up into the rafters, and there were like 5,000 people are looking at these bass players in their underwear, and we're like dodging underneath. True story, that actually happened. And let's see. Are auditions for orchestras blind? Yes, they are, theoretically. How many hours? Let's see. And how many hours a day do we practice? Well, I think I already answered that. And let's see. I'm trying to think if there's one more story that I can tell that's short, but we are down to the end here, and I think that's going to conclude my presentation tonight, and I'm just going to hope the credits roll long enough to cover the rest of the time. I want to thank all of you very much for coming here tonight. The name of the book is Real Men Don't Rehearse. It is available on my website, justinlocke.com, and you can buy it there, you know, with PayPal or, you know, credit card, pay by check, whatever. And thank you very much for coming tonight. I really appreciate your being here. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Wow, applause. At this point, for the credit roll, we have to stand up and shake hands with everybody because there's credits rolling now, and I hope they can't hear me on this thing. So, anyway, thank you very much. You're now on camera, everybody. So that's right. So thanks very much. You can mill around. You can say peas and carrots. You don't have to actually say anything else. The sound is off. Thanks very much for coming. How was the show? Is all right? You good? Beautiful. My clock stopped. Jesus. Oh, God. It was good? Yeah. Anyway, all right. I hope not. I hope not. Yeah, it did. Oh, yeah, well, I was completely...